So if you've ever tried to help someone, or even yourself, get support from social services, you know just how complicated it can get. But here's the thing. Understanding this system isn't just, helpful. It is absolutely essential to making a real difference. It's the blueprint for how help actually gets to the people who need it.
Does this feel familiar? Trying to get help can honestly feel like you've been dropped into this massive, confusing maze. You have a feeling that what you need is in there somewhere, but every turn is a dead end, another phone number, another form you don't get. It is just so frustrating and completely overwhelming. It's really easy to feel totally lost.
And that is exactly why we are here today. We are going to build a map together. A clear, straightforward guide to help you finally see the pathways through this whole system. And by the end of this, you're not just going to have a map, you're going to have the confidence to actually navigate this landscape.
All right, let's lay out the plan. Think of this as the legend for our map. First, we're going to decode all the different kinds of agencies you might run into. Then we'll explore how your location, your geography, completely changes the game. After that, we'll follow the money because we got to see what powers these services. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see why this map is such a powerful tool for change.
Okay, first up, let's get a handle on the basic labels. See, social service organizations aren't all built the same. They're sorted in a few key ways that really dictate how they work, who they're for, and, of course, where they get their money.
So the first big fork in the road is public versus private. Public agencies, think of them as the official government outfits, kind of like the DMV but for social services. They're set up by law and they're funded by all of our tax dollars. Now, private agencies are more like independent groups, maybe charities or nonprofits. Their money comes from donations, grants, sometimes client fees, and it's a board of directors that calls the shots.
And this table really lays it all out side by side. Check out that authority row. For public agencies, it's all about laws, local, state, federal. For private, it's about their own articles of incorporation. And this is a huge deal because it directly affects their scope. Public agencies often have their hands tied by legislation. They can only do what the law says they can do. Private agencies, on the other hand, tend to have a lot more flexibility to adapt and create new programs when they see a new need pop up in the community.
All right, next we've got another way to slice it, primary versus host settings. In a primary setting, social work is the star of the show. It's their entire reason for being. But in a host setting, like a hospital or school, social services play a critical supporting role. They're there to help the main event, whether that's healthcare or education, be as successful as possible.
Another important label to know is affiliation. So sectarian agencies are faith-based. Think Lutheran Social Services or Catholic Charities. The religious background often shapes their mission. Non-sectarian agencies, well, they have secular sponsors. And it's important to remember because of the separation of church and state, all public agencies are non-sectarian by default, but lots of private ones are too.
But, beyond all these official labels, there's something you can't really see on a chart. It's the agency climate. It's that feeling you get the second you walk through the door. Have you ever felt that? That immediate sense of, okay, I'm welcome here, I'm respected, versus that sinking feeling of, great, I'm just another case file. That first impression is everything. It can decide whether someone even bothers to come back for help.
And this right here, this is like a practical checklist for sizing up that climate. Just think about an agency you know. Do they have signs and forms in multiple languages? Can people even get there on a bus? Does the staff actually look like the community they're serving? And maybe the most important question of all, are the people getting the services, the clients, actually sitting at the table, helping to make the decisions? That's the difference between a service that's handed down from on high and a true community partnership.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Now we're going to see how your physical location on the map changes everything. The challenges, the resources, they look completely different depending on if you're in a big city or a small rural town.
We often have this image of social work happening on bustling city streets, but look at this number, 16%. That's how much of the U.S. population lives in rural and micropolitan areas. That's almost 1 out of every 6 people, and they face a totally different world when it comes to getting support.
And this image, it just captures that vibe, doesn't it? In a place like this, help might not come from some big formal agency. It might come from the local church, or a neighbor you've known your whole life, or the one doctor for 3 towns over. These informal, natural networks are an incredible strength, but they also point to a real scarcity of formal, dedicated services.
So let's put them head to head. Urban areas usually have tons of specialized services, right? But they're also dealing with really visible problems like poverty and overcrowding.
Rural areas, on the other hand, have fewer formal agencies, so social workers there have to get creative and lean on those natural helping networks. Friends, family, clergy. But that also brings its own issues, like geographic isolation and a serious lack of anonymity, where absolutely everybody knows everybody's business.
And sometimes the biggest barrier you can face is literally a line drawn on a map. It's called a catchment area, and it decides who gets help and who doesn't. So you hear about a great free program from Township Youth Services? That's amazing, unless you happen to live one single street over the boundary line. And just like that, you're out. It's such a perfect and frustrating example of how geography can create these invisible walls to getting help.
Okay, so we've got the agency types down, we understand the impact of location, but who pays for all of this? Let's do what they always say and follow the money to see how these vital programs actually keep their doors open. As you can see pretty clearly here, there is no single money tree. Funding for social services is more like a patchwork quilt. Sure, public agencies run on taxes, but most organizations are trying to juggle a mix of government grants, community fundraising drives like the United Way, fees from clients, and this thing called purchase of service contracts. It's so important to understand this mix because if one of those patches gets pulled, the whole thing can start to unravel.
Let's zoom in on these POSCs for a second, because they're a really big piece of the modern funding puzzle. Basically, this is when the government outsources a job. Instead of a public agency doing the work itself, it pays a private agency, nonprofit or even for-profit, to provide a specific service. This is a central part of this much bigger trend you might have heard of called privatization, where government responsibilities get shifted over to the private sector.
And just to round out the picture, here are those other key streams. You've got competitive grants from foundations or the government. There are community funds, which are all about local fundraising. And then some agencies charge fees, which might get paid by the client or increasingly get reimbursed through insurance. Understanding this whole financial ecosystem is key to figuring out an agency's stability and its priorities.
So, we've mapped the agencies, we've mapped the geography, and we've mapped the money. So what? Why does any of this matter? Well, because this isn't just some classroom exercise. This knowledge is the bridge from just understanding to actually taking effective action.
And this, right here, is the real takeaway. This is why our map is so important. All these little details, public or private, urban or rural, how it's funded, these are not abstract ideas. They directly decide whether a real person gets help, what kind of help they can get, and how hard they're going to have to fight to get it. This map helps us see the system not as we wish it was, but as it actually is, with all of its strengths and all of its cracks.
I love this quote from the social work pioneer Mary Richmond. It just captures the whole point perfectly. It's one thing to keep helping people out of a ditch, one by one. But it's a much deeper and more important thing to step back and ask, wait a minute, why is this ditch even here in the first place? Understanding the system, the funding, the structure, the barriers, that is the first step to finally getting rid of the ditch for good. It's the move from just helping to creating real, lasting change.
So, I'll leave you with this to think about. Agency turf is what we call it when different agencies are competing for funding, for clients, and sometimes that competition actually hurts the community. So now that you have this map, where do you see those turf wars playing out where you live? And more importantly, how can understanding this bigger picture help us build bridges instead of walls?
When we talk about social services, we usually focus on the problems, right? The issues they're trying to solve. But what about the people? Who are the folks on the front lines actually doing the work? And what kind of invisible pressures are they up against every single day? Well, today, we're going to go under the hood and take a look at the engine room of our social service system. So first, we're going to meet the team, the whole diverse group that makes this system run. Then, we'll switch gears and really dig into the massive challenges they face, the policies, and frankly, the money that shapes what they can and can't do. All right, let's start with the people. Who exactly is on the front lines of social services? So who is it? Who's really out there? Well, the answer isn't as simple as just social worker. It's a whole ecosystem of people. You've got highly trained professionals, you've got paid staff with special skills, and you've got dedicated volunteers. They all bring something different to the table based on their training and experience. So let's start with the core of that workforce, the professionals. The ones who are credentialed, legally regulated, and held to some really tough standards. At the heart of this is a really important concept, licensure. Now, this is so much more than just a certificate to hang on the wall. Think of it as the highest level of legal regulation. It's a state-mandated protection for you, for the public. It proves their credibility, and crucially, it means they can be held legally accountable for the work they do. And you've probably seen titles like these, right? All those letters after someone's name. Well, they vary from state to state, but each one means something specific about that person's level of education, their supervised experience, and the exams they've passed. It's all regulated by state boards to make sure everyone is competent for the job. But the professionals are definitely not working alone. Let's broaden our view to the expanded team and talk about the vital roles that paraprofessionals and volunteers play. So on one side, you've got paraprofessionals. Think of people like caseworker aides or community outreach workers. They're paid staff with specialized on-the-job training. And on the other side, you have volunteers. These are folks who are not paid, and honestly, their role has become absolutely critical as government funding has been pulled back over the years. You know, the role of paraprofessionals actually got a huge boost from history. This New Careers Amendment back in 1966, it was a game changer. It was designed to create entry-level human service jobs for people from disadvantaged communities, tapping into their local knowledge and giving them a real career path. It was a brilliant way to get grassroots involvement in the war on poverty. And when we talk about volunteers, please don't just picture someone stuffing envelopes. I mean, they do that too, but they're involved in everything. They serve on boards, making policy decisions. They're doing advocacy, calling legislators. And they're on the front lines, running crisis hotlines and tutoring kids. They are truly an essential part of the whole operation. Okay, so we've met the team, a dedicated mix of professionals, paraprofessionals, and volunteers. But what happens when that amazing team has to work inside a system that is under just unbelievable pressure? And this is the real turning point, because a dedicated workforce can only do so much. It's just not enough when the very system they're a part of is cracking under the strain. To really get what's going on, we have to understand these constraints. So in this last section, we're going to break down 3 of the biggest forces that create huge obstacles for everyone we've just talked about: bureaucratic disentitlement, budget cuts, and privatization. First up is a concept that sounds a bit academic, but trust me, it's a huge deal. It's called bureaucratic disentitlement. Michael Lipsky came up with the term, and it describes this quiet, almost sneaky way of cutting social services. Instead of passing a big, loud law to cut a program, you just slowly change the rules, add more red tape, and make it almost impossible for people to actually get the help they're entitled to. So how does this actually play out? Well, it happens in stages. First, you might impose new regulations that make it harder to qualify for a service. Then you limit resources. Maybe you freeze hiring so the wait lists get longer and longer. Next, you can fragment the services, so a person has to go to 5 different offices instead of 1. Add in endless delays and a mountain of paperwork that ties workers' hands, and you see what's happening? Each step is another hurdle that effectively disentitles people from the help they need.
Now, if disentitlement is the subtle approach, fiscal retrenchment is the sledgehammer. This is the direct, out-in-the-open reduction of budgets. We're talking about straight-up cuts to funding for social programs, which of course creates massive instability and shrinks that safety net.
And that brings us to privatization. This is a huge trend where governments choose to contract out social services to private organizations. That includes both nonprofits and for-profit companies. The main argument is that it's more cost-effective, but it also raises big questions about accountability and whether a profit motive can get in the way of helping people. And all of this pressure, it leads to one of the most gut-wrenching ethical dilemmas in the entire field. It's called social triage. Just like in a hospital emergency room, when resources are scarce, workers are sometimes forced to classify clients to decide who gets help. This often means prioritizing those who seem to have the highest chance of success. It is a truly heartbreaking consequence of a system stretched to its limits. And so that leaves us with this enormous, fundamental question. The people out there doing this work are skilled, they're dedicated, but they're operating inside a system that's under constant pressure. So, in a world of limited resources, how do we build a system that is both efficient and humane? That's the challenge, right there at the very heart of social work today.